This story is called A Life Without Filters. They never tell you how much a life can change in an instant, but I guess you don't really need someone to tell you that when you're an Instagram influencer. Hell, that's the whole point, isn't it? To live for those changes, to thrive on every twist and turn, every new follower, every heart-shaped notification that pops up on your phone. You're always one post away from a new opportunity, one perfect picture away from another spike in your follower count. That was my life before. My whole existence, really. And then I met him, and everything flipped upside down. Let me back up. My name's Katie, and a couple of years ago I was living my best life. Or what I thought was my best life. You know the drill. Selfies at sunset, beach pics in the morning light, gym videos where I'd work up just the right amount of sweat to look good, but not too much to ruin the makeup. I was one of those it girls in the influencer scene with a following that fed my ego and kept me going, even when I felt like I was running on fumes. It wasn't just a hobby, it was my livelihood. I wasn't just taking pictures, I was curating a brand, selling a lifestyle, and it was working. At least I thought it was. Then came that night. The night of the party in the Hollywood Hills. You've seen the type, glitzy, over-the-top influencers and wannabe actors mingling with each other, all hoping for that one shot that'll go viral. I was invited by one of my TikTok friends who had recently blown up for some skincare routine, and I figured, why not? It'd be good content for the feed, and maybe I'd network with someone who could boost my brand. The party was everything you'd expect: loud music, overpriced drinks, and influencers jockeying for the best lighting. I was in the middle of taking some photos near the pool when I noticed someone watching me from across the deck. At first, I didn't pay him any mind. I mean, people watch all the time. That's the nature of the game. But there was something about him that stood out. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't holding a phone or checking his notifications. He was just there, silent, still, and watching. It made me uneasy, but at the same time, I was curious. When he finally approached me, I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. He wasn't like anyone I'd ever met before. He had this aura about him, this confidence that drew me in. His name was Alexander. He was tall, pale, with dark eyes that seemed to bore into your soul. Cliché, right? But it worked. I was intrigued. We started talking, and it didn't take long before he brought up something strange. He told me that he wasn't like everyone else at the party, that he had seen a different kind of life, one that didn't rely on filters or followers, one that existed beyond the superficiality of social media. I laughed at first, thinking he was just another weirdo trying to get attention. But the more he talked, the more serious he seemed. He said he could offer me something no one else could. A way out. A way to escape the constant pressure of always being on, always performing. I thought he was just talking in metaphors. But then he said it. The word that made my blood run cold. Vampire. I mean, come on, right? But the way he said it, the way he looked at me, I don't know. It felt real. He told me that he could make me immortal, that I could escape the mundane human existence and join him in a life that was free of all the nonsense that plagued the modern world. He said I'd never have to worry about aging, about losing relevance, about being forgotten. At first, I was terrified. Who wouldn't be? But the more I thought about it, the more it appealed to me. Immortality? No more aging, no more fighting against the clock. I could be young and beautiful forever. I could have all the time in the world to build my brand, to grow my empire. It sounded too good to be true, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I told him I needed time to think. He gave me his number, told me to call him when I was ready. And that was it. He disappeared into the night, like some kind of shadow, leaving me standing there by the pool, my head spinning with possibilities. A couple of days passed, and I couldn't get him out of my mind. The idea of being immortal, of never having to deal with the pressures of life, was intoxicating. So I made the call. We met up and I told him I was ready. He didn't turn me right away, though. He gave me a couple of months to get my affairs in order, to prepare for the change. During that time, I was buzzing with excitement. I teased my followers with cryptic posts, hinting that something big was coming. I couldn't wait to reveal my new life to them. When the night finally came, it was everything I expected, and more. The transformation was intense, painful even, but when it was over, I felt powerful, more alive than I had ever felt before. I could move faster, see better, feel stronger. I was flying, literally and figuratively. And for a while, everything was perfect. I reveled in my new abilities and I was eager to show them off. I kept asking Alexander and the others in the clan to take pictures of me while I was flying, or while I used my mind powers on humans. I thought it would be the perfect content for my followers, something they'd never seen before. But that's when I hit the first snag. "Why aren't these showing up?" I asked Alexander one night, after reviewing the latest batch of photos. He just looked at me, almost amused. "Katie," he said, "vampires don't have reflections." I stared at him, dumbfounded. No reflections? No images? That couldn't be right. How was I supposed to keep my Instagram going if I couldn't take any pictures? How was I supposed to stay relevant? The reality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was immortal, sure, but at what cost? My entire life had been built around social media, my brand, my followers, my income. Without photos, without videos, what did I have? Who was I? I tried to make it work at first. I posted throwbacks, reused old photos, tried to engage with my followers in new ways. But it wasn't enough. I started to feel it, this gnawing emptiness, this withdrawal. It was like a drug. And I couldn't get my fix. No matter how powerful I had become, I couldn't fill the void that social media had left behind. And it got worse. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I stopped feeding, stopped caring. I even started trying to walk out into the sunlight, just to feel something again, just to remember what it was like to be normal. But Alexander always stopped me. He'd pull me back into the shadows, remind me of the gift I had been given. But it didn't feel like a gift anymore. It felt like a curse. The clan started to distance themselves from me. I wasn't the strong, powerful vampire they had hoped I'd be. I was a disappointment, a failure. Alexander tried to help me at first, but eventually even he gave up. He realized that I was broken, that I couldn't adapt to this new life. I'm just here, existing, not really living. I watch the world go by, but I can't participate. I'm stuck in the shadows, watching as everything I built crumbles around me. My followers have moved on, my brand is dead, and I'm left with nothing but the memories of a life I can never reclaim. I thought immortality would be the answer. I thought it would solve all my problems, but I realize now that some things are more important than living forever. Sometimes it's the fleeting moments that matter the most, the ones you can capture in a photo, share with the world, and then let go. And now, even though I'll never age, never die, I'm haunted by the one thing I can never get back, my life. This story is called Ashes to Ashes. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but whoever came up with that never knew my mother. Cold didn't suit her. Fire did. The woman always had a way of burning through everything she touched: friendships, marriages, money, family, and finally, herself. But let me back up. You probably want to know why I did it. Everyone always wants to know why. I grew up in a quiet little town in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where people pretended everything was perfect, even when it wasn't, especially when it wasn't. My mother was the queen of pretending. To the neighbors, she was the charming woman who threw the best barbecues in the neighborhood and always had a joke ready. To me, she was a black hole that sucked the life out of everyone around her. A drink in one hand, a cigarette in the other, and never a kind word to spare. She was absent in every way that mattered, except when she wasn't, and those moments were worse. Much worse. I learned early on to fend for myself. When you grow up with someone like her, you figure out pretty quickly that if you want to survive, you can't rely on anyone but yourself. And you sure as hell can't rely on a mother who'd rather spend her nights in a drugged-up haze than give a damn about her kid. I remember the first time she hit me. I must have been 7 or 8. It wasn't a hard slap, more of a careless backhand that caught me off guard. But it wasn't the force of the blow that stayed with me. It was the look on her face afterward, the blank, glassy-eyed stare that said, I didn't even notice. Like I wasn't even there. Like I was nothing. That was the beginning of it. The start of a long, slow descent into a kind of hatred I didn't know I was capable of. It grew inside me, like a weed pushing its way through the cracks in my heart, until it consumed everything. And all the while, she just drifted through life, oblivious to the damage she was causing, oblivious to the wreckage she left behind. You'd think a mother like that would at least be loud about it. Scream, yell, throw things, but not her. No, my mother wasn't a screamer. She wasn't anything, really, just a husk of a person who filled the air with secondhand smoke and empty words. There was no love in her, no fire, despite the ashes she left in her wake. But that was about to change. I'd been planning it for years, really, not consciously at first. But the thought had been there, lurking in the back of my mind, growing stronger with every cruel word, every time she chose a bottle over me, every time she just wasn't there. I fantasized about it, turning the idea over and over in my head until it became a part of me, until it felt inevitable. And then, one night, it happened. She'd taken her usual cocktail of Xanax, Ambient, and vodka, her trifecta of oblivion. I found her slumped in her favorite chair, her head lolling to one side, a half-empty glass of vodka still clutched in her hand. She was barely conscious, but she was still breathing, always just hanging on, like some kind of cruel joke the universe had decided to play on me. I didn't even hesitate. I ran to the garage and grabbed a can of gasoline and a pack of matches. The smell of the fuel was sharp, acrid, but it didn't bother me. It was cleansing, in a way, purifying. I doused her in it, soaked her from head to toe, until the liquid pooled around her feet, the fumes rising in a thick, intoxicating cloud. She barely stirred, just a small, shallow breath, the rise and fall of her chest almost imperceptible. She was already gone, really. This was just a formality. I lit the match and let it hover in the air for a moment, watching the tiny flame dance in the dim light. And then I let it fall. The fire engulfed her instantly. Flames roared to life, licking at her skin, devouring her clothes, her hair, everything. The heat was intense, the smell even more so. Charred flesh, mixed with the lingering scent of gasoline. It reminded me of barbecued pork, the kind she used to make at those summer cookouts when she pretended to be a real person for the neighbors. She didn't scream. I told you she wasn't a screamer. She never fought back, never made a sound. She just burned. And for the first time in my life, she was finally bringing some light into the world. The flames danced around her, crackling and popping, casting long shadows across the walls of the living room. It was beautiful, in a way, almost poetic. I stayed by her side the whole time, soaking in the warmth, watching her body slowly turn to ash. The transition between life and death was so seamless, so smooth, that I almost missed it. One moment she was there, and the next she wasn't. She was just a pile of smoldering remains, a blackened skeleton that barely resembled the woman she had once been. In the end, she went out the way she lived, quietly, without a fight, without any real presence. But I have to give her credit for one thing. She did show a little flair. For once in her miserable life, she made an impact. She left her mark. When it was over, I stood there for a long time, just staring at the ashes. I thought I'd feel something, relief maybe, or satisfaction. But all I felt was nothing, just emptiness, a void where all that anger and hatred had once been. I thought that killing her would fill it, but it didn't. It just left me hollow. They'll come for me soon, I know that. The fire was too big, too loud, too obvious. Someone must have seen the smoke, called the police. But that's okay, I'm not running. I've been running all my life, and I'm tired of it. Let them come. Let them find me here, standing in the ashes of the woman who should have been my mother. Let them see what she turned me into. I'm not afraid anymore. I did what I had to do. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere in those ashes there's a part of me that's finally free. But as I stand here, the heat from the fire still lingering in the air, I realize something. She may be gone, but the shadow she cast over my life, it's still here. It'll always be here. Because some flames, no matter how hard you try to put them out, never really die. They just burn on, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the next spark to bring them back to life. This story is called The Drowning Dream. There's a certain kind of fear that sticks with you, no matter how old you get. It creeps into your bones when you're young, and even as you grow up, you never really shake it. You just learn to live with it. Sarah understood that better than anyone. I first met Sarah when she was in her late 20s, but she told me that the fear had been with her since childhood. It all started when she was just a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, swimming in the river near her family's summer cabin. It should have been an ordinary day, just another lazy afternoon in the water, the sun beating down, the sky a perfect blue. But things like that have a way of turning sour when you least expect it. There was a current in the river, nothing too dangerous at first, just a little whirlpool spinning off in the deeper water. She had seen it before, and like any curious kid, she got too close. The water grabbed her like a giant hand, pulling her under, and before she knew it, she was drowning. Panic set in. That primal instinct to claw her way to the surface, to breathe, to survive. But the water didn't let go. It dragged her down, deeper and deeper, until she was sure she was going to die. Her father saved her that day, pulled her out just in time. But something inside her never recovered. That moment of sheer terror, of feeling the water close in around her, stayed with her. Even after her body healed, her mind never quite did. The river had taken something from her, her sense of safety, maybe, or her trust in the world around her. Whatever it was, it left her with a deep, gnawing fear of water. Not just any water, though deep, dark, and unknowable water. The kind of water that hides things beneath its surface. The kind that pulls you under and doesn't let go. That fear, she told me, was called thalassophobia. It was a fancy word for something simple. Terror. It wasn't just about drowning, though that was part of it. It was about what might be lurking in the water, waiting for her, something big, something hungry, something that didn't belong in this world. Years passed, but the fear never went away. It simmered beneath the surface of her life, always there, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And then, when she was in the 6th grade, it did. It happened during a camping trip with her family. They had gone to a lake, a peaceful, picturesque spot in the middle of the woods. The kind of place where the water was calm and still, like glass. But for Sarah, the lake wasn't peaceful. It was terrifying. She couldn't stop thinking about the river, about the way the current had sucked her under. She couldn't shake the feeling that the lake was just as dangerous, just as eager to claim her. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her bed was facing the closet, and the darkness seemed to press in on her from all sides. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, made her heart race. She tossed and turned, trying to force herself to relax, but the fear had her in its grip. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that she finally drifted off. And that's when the nightmare began. The dream always started off nice enough. She'd be in a familiar place, surrounded by warmth and light, maybe laughing or playing. But then something would shift. She'd go through a door or turn her head, and suddenly she'd be somewhere else, somewhere dark. It was a black void, with water just deep enough to cover her feet. Cold, murky water that stretched on forever. And there was a light in the distance, just a tiny pinprick of brightness, barely visible. She knew she had to reach that light. It was her only way out. So she would start walking, her heart pounding, her breath coming in short, panic gasps. The water would ripple around her ankles, cold and uninviting, but she kept moving, desperate to escape the darkness. But no matter how fast she walked, the light never seemed to get any closer. It felt like she was walking for hours, her legs growing tired, her heart pounding harder with each step. And then, just as she thought she might reach the light, she would hear it. Splashing. Behind her. Fast and loud, like something big was moving through the water, coming toward her. She would freeze, her heart hammering in her chest, and then slowly, she would turn around. That's when she'd see it. The monster. It was always the same. A huge, deformed creature, twisted and unnatural, with arms too long and skin too pale. It was like something out of a nightmare, something that didn't belong in this world. Its body was covered in decaying flesh, with seaweed and algae hanging off it like tattered rags. And its eyes, oh God, its eyes were dark, empty pits, staring at her with a hunger that made her blood run cold. She would try to run, but the water slowed her down. The monster would be getting closer, its footsteps splashing in the water behind her. She would be so close to the light, so close to escape, but it would always grab her. Its slimy, rotting hands would wrap around her ankles, dragging her down into the water. She could feel the cold water closing in around her, filling her lungs, suffocating her. And then she'd wake up. Only that night, when she woke up, something was different. She wasn't in the lake anymore, but she wasn't free either. She was in her room, lying in bed, but she couldn't move. Sleep paralysis. They call it a state between waking and sleeping where your mind is awake, but your body is still trapped in the dream. But for Sarah, it was more than just a trick of the mind. She looked around her room, her heart racing, but something was wrong. The closet door was wide open, and everything inside, her clothes, her shelves, her boxes, was gone. Instead, there was water. Dark, murky water, just like in the dream. It covered the floor of the closet, lapping at the edges, and there was something in it. Something moving. Sarah tried to scream, but her voice wouldn't come. She could only watch as the water rippled and something began to rise from it. A hand. A pale, decaying hand, with flesh peeling off and bones jutting out at odd angles. The smell hit her next. Rotting meat, salt water, and something else, something foul and unplaceable. It filled the room, suffocating her, making her gag. The hand gripped the edge of the closet, and slowly, a figure began to emerge. It was the same creature from her dream. A grotesque, decayed humanoid figure, covered in seaweed and chains, with bits of algae growing out of its skin. Water dripped from its body, pooling on the floor as it dragged itself out of the closet, inching closer to her. Sarah's chest felt heavy, like the air had been sucked out of the room. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but watch as the creature crawled onto her bed. Its weight pressed down on her, cold and wet, as it straddled her chest. Water dripped onto her face, into her mouth, her nose, making her feel like she was drowning all over again. The creature's face loomed over hers, its mouth hanging open, revealing rows of jagged, rotting teeth. It leaned in closer, closer, until she could feel its breath on her skin, cold, damp, and stinking of decay. She thought she was going to die. She thought it was going to drown her, just like the river had tried to all those years ago. And then, just as it opened its mouth to speak, the light came on. Sarah blinked, disoriented, and suddenly the creature was gone. The closet was back to normal, filled with her clothes and shelves, no water in sight. She was still in bed, but her chest was no longer heavy, and she could breathe again. She turned her head and saw her mother standing in the doorway, holding her baby brother. "Sarah, can you help me make a bottle?" her mother asked, her voice soft and gentle, like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Sarah knew it. She could still feel the weight of the creature on her chest, still smell the rot in the air. She started to cry, deep, heaving sobs that racked her whole body. She tried to tell her mother what had happened, tried to explain the nightmares, the creature, the water, but the words wouldn't come out right. Her mother just stood there, confused, unsure of what to do. Eventually, Sarah calmed down, but the fear never went away. The nightmares never stopped. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that black void, with water covering her feet and the light in the distance. And every time, the monster was there, waiting for her. She had learned to live with it, but the fear was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. She told me that even now, as an adult, she still dreams of the water. She still wakes up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, convinced that the creature is back. She still fears that one day it will drag her under, and this time no one will be there to save her. Sarah lives her life like anyone else. She goes to work, she sees friends, she does her best to push the nightmares to the back of her mind. But deep down, she knows that the fear will always be there. The water will always be waiting, and every time she closes her eyes, she wonders if this will be the night when the monster finally pulls her under for good. The thing about fear is, it never really goes away. It just waits,